Hello, I'm Dr. Alfred Miller. I'm with ACBSP Region 8, and I work at higher colleges of technology in United Arab Emirates, Fujairah Women's College. So in the fall of 2020, I had a presentation, and it was leveraging student leadership and marketing research, a study of expatriate tax behavior. And that was for the theme, developing business leaders for a better tomorrow. So the students were trying to develop some research skills, and this is the aspect of leadership that we're trying to improve with them. So I would like to thank the students at this time. Layla Al-Kindi, she is the marketing major who was involved, and Alanud Al-Balushi was from my taxation class, and she joined for the summer. So we began with like 7 students in a small marketing section on a project-oriented class, and then we extended that study through the summer. We were able to win a SURF grant, Student Undergraduate Research Fellowship. This allowed me to employ 2 students as research assistants over the summer. So originally, this was a marketing research class. I have an affiliation with Henley Business School, and I'm pursuing a DBA, a second doctorate, and my supervisors are Dr. David Ewers and Dr. Keiichi Nakata. The background of research includes the Brookings Institute, which has taken a look at taxes that are going uncollected, and they think it's 1 out of every 6 tax dollars in the US. By their estimate, 3/4 of the federal deficit is not being collected each year. So, I mean, if we could collect this taxes, then the deficit would be wiped out directly. The income misreporting seems to be highest for sole proprietorships, the farming sector, and the high income households. One of the tools used in the study is this moral obligation of paying just taxes survey. And we're primarily focusing on the expats, the expatriates, the overseas people. We want to take a look at the definition of tax. We're looking at income tax, 72% of all tax evasion, taxes on assets and wealth, and sales tax, such as in UAE, we have a 5% value added tax. You may have heard that UAE didn't have any taxes, but actually we do. Effective 2018, we've introduced that. We don't have income tax yet. KH Coder, that's a technology. Artificial intelligence, unsupervised machine learning, these technologies are the future of fighting tax evasion. It's an automated way to try to determine where the cheating is occurring. And we've created some business models for this. So my first research question, or our first research question, tax evasion is unethical, ? And research question 2, what are the pattern of factors for tax evasion by expatriates? And we have a business model for that we'll present. So we're primarily looking at the SME and individuals expatriates rather than these corporations, the global players like Google or Apple. We're not considering them in the study. The moral obligation of paying just taxes survey, that comes from Martin Crow's 1944 study, and this survey's been widely deployed since then. Robert McGee has used this in a wide range of studies in many countries. But that survey, that helps us answer if there's an ethical justification for tax evasion. Is there a way to somehow justify in one's mind, to rationalize the tax evasion is okay. So there is a religious versus a secular versus a philosophical approach. Later on, after Martin Crowe, with the modern era, there comes in a human rights justification towards if it's okay to pay tax, like it's not okay to pay tax, maybe in an unjust political system that was a human rights violator. We look at individuals' relationship with the state, individuals' relationship with the tax-paying community, the individual's relationship with God. And as I mentioned, people tend to consider when they determine if it's, if they're going to evade taxes or not, they do consider if the government is corrupt, inefficient, or if the system itself is unfair. So that these ways to rationalize or justify evasion include a perspective of the government itself. So in the database marketing class that was from spring 2020, we had 7 students. They have to create a marketing stack. So the marketing stack is driven by 3 factors: technologies to build awareness, technologies to maintain the relationship with the suppliers, and the technologies we're using to analyze our data with. So I've listed these, and you may recognize some of the icons of the different technologies. But these were worked with in the class, and this is the marketing stack that was created by the students. And I'll briefly discuss some of the types of data. So we began with a prospect list of 198 emails. And of those, the ones who chose to become our customer was 52, and 52 persons responded. And students used a range of social media applications to collect the data. Moral obligation of paying just taxes survey, that is actually, it's a measurement of behavioral aspects. We did collect descriptive data, things like demographics. The historical data is available with the study from McGee and many other researchers. However, we're not needing their data, but this particular approach has been deployed with this survey numerous times. The instrument has been validated. It's considered reliable. There was no need for real-time data. A lot of times you want real-time data, but for our particular study, it was unnecessary. So concatenated data is a spreadsheet term that we work with in the class, but it's a way of the data being, the data that we collect, how it's connected. Is concatenated, and that's something that the students learn. Aggregated data is what we fed into the KH Coder program. So basically, we just fed into the computer program a massive amount of data, and the program analyzed it. The data architecture, some of the tools that helped us work with this. We worked with Google Docs. The students set this up. And they did sharing of various social media links and the collection of data. And there was one of the questions, we did modify the survey, and we added a question on the end where we were asking for feedback, input, and just their general perspective on taxation. So actually the 25% who did answer, that was extremely valuable, because that became a large portion of what we went on to research in the big data approach was coming from this 25% of these topics that the respondents told us that they thought were important. Out of the survey, there were 3 questions This is from the Crow 1944 survey. There were 3 questions that stood out, and the number, the 3.61, that was on a 5-point scale, and 3.44 and 3.39. These numbers on that Likert scale, they're the outstanding questions where the score was significantly higher compared to the rest. So question 11 has to deal with corruption. So corruption, if people think it's a corrupt system, then it's justifiable to evade. And then also question 14, if I can't afford to pay, it's justifiable to evade tax. And then question 18 deals with the government, where if the government is viewed as, unfair on the basis of imprisoning people for their political opinions, this is viewed as a way to justify tax evasion. So if any of these 3 conditions exist, then that tended to motivate tax evasion as per people's responses. And we took a big data approach to answer the second question, where we developed the business models. So I mentioned about the open-ended question. It gave us a treasure trove of topics to explore. And that became, the topic for the big data collection, and the students divided these topics up. I mentioned here, we don't think we've achieved topic saturation, but we've come a long way, and we've definitely explored them. So these are the students from the marketing study, and this is how they divided up the work. So Fatma Aldenhani, she was in charge, and she researched certain topics. And then the other students in the class, they were responsible for these other portions. So the students largely took charge of this particular part of the project. And this is representing the summer study right here. So Layla, she was from the marketing class in spring. And then Alanud was my taxation student from accounting. She joined. So they researched the original 13 constructs that they studied in spring, plus there were 5 additional constructs that they studied. And these 3 of these came from the behavioral study, and I showed you where it was a 3.69 and the different scores that highlighted those topics. That's 3 of these. And then 2 of these other ones just came out of the research. But we ended up with 18 topics that we collected big data upon. So this is evidence that we actually won the grant. So it was a federal grant, and the students were paid, and it was administered through my employer, which is a federal entity. Data collection primarily occurred online, and we used this technology called KH Coder, which was developed by a Japanese researcher, and it has been expanded to many other languages, but it is a text analysis program, and it is effective in English. The data, one of the challenges with KH Coder is you got to get your data clean enough to work with the program. A lot of the material we download from the web has a lot of tags and HTML codes and so on. This all has to be cleaned. So we use the clean text program is what we found out works best for our application. However, you could take all your data and place it into Excel. Excel has a clean command, and that works also. Not as well, though, as what this clean text did. And there's a link that'll take you there if you want to use that. And I guess the bottom line is doing data cleansing by hand, although it's possible, it's a highly inefficient use of your research time. So it's much better to automate that particular process. mention about some of our successes here. So using a big data strategy, we collected data on the 18 constructs. So the constructs, the titles of them helped us target the data. So the students were responsible for targeting these constructs and then collecting the data which was about those constructs. So we acquired 2,090 pages of data, which was almost 380,000 words on tax evasion, tax avoidance. So that is the data set we're working with. I might mention that when we actually tried to run the KH Coder, this was almost too big. I had to get with the author of the program, the KH Coder. That author was able to give me a few pointers on how I could manage this large data set. But anyway, we'll get into that later. Okay, so the purpose of this preparing the data for analysis, this cleaning process. So we had to remove unwanted observations. If it didn't fit, we had to leave it out. Structural errors in the data, and that the data cleansing program helps with that. Managing unwanted outliers. So if we had some data we thought didn't fit, we'd have to take a look at it and investigate. We make a decision about it, and we might not include it. How we're going to handle missing data. So an example of that might be something like bootstrapping. So some of the best practices we employed, we developed a system, or the students developed a system. We worked with new computers. They classified the data as current data by categories, and if it was mission critical, then we included it. We partitioned away data that we would not use. So this is one of the technology applications for the business model. So this is produced with KH Coder, and this is called a self-organizing map. So this was the hardest one to produce, and it took the longest. And this is the one that prompted me to contact the author. And he recommended a couple strategies. One of the ones, he wanted me to do sampling because he thought the data size was too large. But anyway, I was able to get it to run with the full size data that the students had collected. These are the constructs as per, the 380,000 words. So this is, this is the definition of the tax evasion problem. It includes these constructs. So business stakeholders is one group or topic, government spending, tax effect on the economy, taxation of the super rich, the IRS, tax evasion, tax compliance, and then tax morale, which was a new idea that was not present before we ran this model. And these ideas, these colors mean something. So the colors that are close to pink, like business stakeholders, and to a lesser extent, tax compliance, and maybe even a little bit of tax evasion, but, well, there are distant constructs, and these ones that are closer to like blue and this gray, and maybe this green a little bit, these are kind of in the foreground. So, okay, blue, very close, pink, very distant, gray kind of in the middle, or a neutral color. So these constructs are separated in time and space, and the color has something to do with its position, if it's distant or close, and if it's close to another construct or not. Now here I'm showing the multi-dimensional scaling, which is another technology with the KH Coder. And this is showing that we have the data fit this model rather easily. That's what the stress factor means. It means that we're able to analyze the data, and then this picture was developed rather easily with the low stress factor 0.153. So we've got 2 dimensions, and then By color, we can see that IRS is separate and it's distant, and then transaction is separate. And then we have these others. So here, like we have country, taxation, and economy, that's one construct. And these rate individual money revenue company, that might be more like an entity level construct. And then year, deduction, credit, that sounds like related to taxation. And green is taxation also, but it's more like a behavioral or a perspective. So I just gave a brief interpretation of how we might interpret that. So if you want to get more information on multidimensional scaling and stress factors, here's some of the literature review. So this is one source here, and this is another. Kruskal is an older source. It's a statistical approach, by the way. So this is the correspondence analysis. So the correspondence analysis shows all the constructs on here, and these squares are the constructs. So this is, you know, we actually had more than this, but this is what it broke down into using the model. So A5 and A3, they're closely related. A6, the size of the square indicates that we had a large amount of data available about A6. So there wasn't that much data on A12. Some of the others, A1 was kind of small, but these that are physically close to each other, they're related. And then like A6 and say A9, those are very distant constructs. So the size matters, and then its location with respect to the other constructs. This was some of the analysis we did in our interpretation. So we decided that A6 was a construct, A5 and A3, A8 and A2, A12, A7, A9, and A13 was a construct, A1, 11, 4, and 10. The variation from one construct to another is attributed to 38% on dimension 1 and about 20% on dimension 2. We're not really venturing at this point what might comprise those dimensions, but I will go back. So we noticed we had a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 factor model, and here this was a 6-factor model also, the multidimensional scaling. So that's somewhat of an alignment. The self-organizing map, it fit best as an 8-factor model. Okay, so I would like to make a couple comments here. One of our resources is Milner and Berg. So they're advocating that we could use this type of a business model approach because we're going to be looking for patterns in the data to try to identify who might be the tax cheaters, so we can target them for audit, for example. And I just want to make this comment here that the liberal script has a moral authority to tax effectively, sufficiently, and equitably, and to present creation of a market failure in economics, market failure in economics, where this could lead to reinforcement of income inequality and creating free riders. So we're trying to, from an economics, we want to avoid these failures from occurring in our market, and we can do that with effective tax collection, effective and fair tax collection. And continuing on from the perspective Milner and Berg, I guess think of the great amount of individualism that exists in the system. There is a wide variety of loopholes and methods. The loopholes are driven by an individual perspective, but it's also driven by the complexity of the system has allowed a lot of loopholes to be available to the taxpayer to exploit. So we need to regulate this system greater. The nation state must do this in order to be effective in combating tax evasion. Authoritative systems are probably more effective in this regard than, you know, a more individualistic system like the US, where you have greater freedom. So this is the paper that applies to the conclusion of the grant right here. So a report had to be filed, and we had a Scopus article that was produced. So some of the ladies were able to have a research publication when they leave college from their undergraduate degree. And that's an advantage for them when they go and they pursue, say, a master's degree study, to show that they had a legitimate publication as an undergraduate. So I think that the study tended to help them build their research leadership, and that gives them an advantage as they enter the workforce or pursue further study. So we were, in conclusion, we achieved success. We pursued and completed a grant. And then in the context of the coursework and the project work, students were able to collect and gather data. They developed appropriate strategies, and they managed a large data set. And then they were able to use this. In some ways, it's a cutting edge computer program. And we were able to develop these business models. And then we, you know, the analysis that I showed you, not all of it's by me, much of that contribution is by the students. So I think the students learned something about data analytics. So I do hope you enjoyed my study and with my students. And I know a lot of good came of this, you know, Scopus article. It was a centerpiece of one class plus a research grant. And if you'd like to find out more, you can contact me here at amiller@hct.ac.ae. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.